It's Reality Check with Craig Price.
I'm an idiot.
4 minutes in and I'm already wrong.
I'm like a monkey. Hello, look at me.
You're like a beautiful mind. I'm more like Forrest Gump.
So it's,
Craig Price is the man.
I knew it. Craig, shut up. It's Reality Check with Craig Price. This week, official Reality Check announcer Scott McKain is here to talk about distinction. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for listening. Got a great show for you this week, but before we get to our pal Scott, I just want to remind folks that if you like the show and you enjoy the show, please head over to iTunes and leave a review. And while you're there, look for the app. There are lots of great goodies on the app that are exclusive just to the app, and it's also a great way to take Reality Check with you wherever you may be. Internet be damned. But on to this week's guest. You hear him first thing every episode. He's got a great book out called Create Distinction, What to Do When Great Isn't Good Enough to Grow Your Business. And I think people all scramble to be distinctive, and I think in doing so, often they all end up being alike. It's, like, remember the old tribal tattoos and, hipster beards. Everybody's got one. They all look alike. You can't tell people from one from another. But Scott is here to talk about true distinction that separates you from your competition. He's also a friend, so it's just nice to catch up with him, like I did with this episode. It was recorded in late July at the National Speakers Association Convention in Washington, D.C. So sit back, relax, but be unique about it as we talk distinction with Scott McKain. I don't get to see you very often.
Yeah.
Though I'm excited because you live in Henderson now.
Right.
You're an Indiana boy.
I am.
What made you get to Henderson?
I used to live there. I lived there for a period of time between 2003, 2005, and then always wanted to get back. There's so many conventions. There's so much speaking business.
Yeah.
When I was living in Indiana, and I looked at my calendar, and all the winter months I'm either speaking in Vegas or in Phoenix or in San Diego or Orlando.
We don't want to hear your sob story.
I was just trying to make travel. If you're in Indiana with the bad weather,
I know.
So you're going out a day early. You give your speech. So a 1 hour keynote is a 3-day trip, and so that was the real advantage to being out there.
This winter it was Michigan in January, Minnesota -17 in February.
Yeah.
I'm the guy that goes to the winter places because that big names like you will go.
I think this is our 13th consecutive year that I had a speech in either North or South Dakota in February. So we made Fargo in February again this year. So that's always
try walking around the Como Park Zoo at -17 in Minnesota.
Man, I can't imagine.
It was great, but no, I was excited because I have a family in Henderson. Right there. Was it? What's that big community? Analog or Antietam?
There's Anthem.
Anthem,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So my father-in-law lives in Anthem.
Oh, no kidding.
And so,
we're very close to
yeah, because when I see you post food restaurants because we're
same
buddies,
restaurant,
and it's like, oh, I know where that is. Or I've eaten there.
Yeah.
And so,
Oh, that's so cool.
So it's one of those things, but every time I go, you're out of town because you're one of the busiest speakers I've ever met. And for those of you who don't know, this is obviously Scott McKain, the voice of Reality Check with Craig Price.
I just make up dates and leave town. Basically, I want people to know.
Well, I want to tell you that I get so many podcasters who are so jealous of my intro.
Oh, you're kidding, really?
Because they're like, who did you get to do that? And I'm like, oh that's my friend. What? Who did you pay to do that? It's like, because that beautiful, the sultry voice of Scott McKain, CPAE, Hall of Fame speaker. I am the envy of every podcaster who, even if they're new or established, I've had some established guys going, "Oh, that sounds beautiful,"
man.
and then my whiny, squeaky voice comes in. But it's like it's a great way to start off. So obviously, thank you very much.
Well, you're very welcome. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, and the reason I have you here is because you have a book. It's an anniversary.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to get you on for a while, but our schedules are
your schedule too.
My schedule is wide open.
Come on, it's not. It's not.
Yeah.
You're being modest.
No, I'm being fairly honest, and so
fairly. I get it.
Yeah, but our schedules have not been able to sync up. But we're here at NSA and here in lovely DC, and so I'm like, I want Scott McKain to come here. And so the book is called Distinction, and then the subtitle is?
The book is Create Distinction, What to Do When Great Isn't Good Enough to Grow Your Business, because part of it's an update of a book I did a few years back called Collapse of Distinction. And, as times change, and I wanted to update the book. But the other cool thing was that some of the predictions from the original edition came true.
You say
And
that like
so-
it's a surprise.
Well-
You put that in there because you actually thought and researched it, and you figured, well, this is how the trending.
Yeah. Well, the other part was then the biggest selling business book of all time is Good to Great.
Yeah.
In Good to Great, they said there were 11 great companies, and kind of the thesis of Good to Great is if your business would model itself after these 11 great companies, then you too could create a great organization and become a great professional. So what I did with this book is let's go back and see what happened to those 11 companies. Only one of the companies, by any objective analysis, is still a great company. The model of retail in the book Good to Great was Circuit City.
Ooh.
The model of financial management was Fannie Mae.
Oh, good Lord.
5 of the 11 are performing below the S&P average. 1 of the 11 has lost half of its market cap. And so obviously, great wasn't good enough in today's marketplace to sustain those businesses even over, the few year period of time from the publication of that book. And so it got me thinking about what does it take? And I think if you look at those distinctive businesses, they've kind of become cliches. We hear so many people talking about it.
Well,
but
that's the thing about cliches is that at one time they were original and fresh, and the reason why they're cliches is they're so successful.
They're so true. You're exactly
Well, they're so
right.
successful that people like. We were talking to Paul Bright, a filmmaker,
Yeah.
and we were talking about how people were watching Star Wars and going, "Oh, this is a ripoff of Kurosawa," or they were seeing Kurosawa and thinking, "This is a ripoff of Star Wars."
Yeah,
It's like,
right.
no.
Yeah.
This hero's journey, everybody ripped it off because it works.
Exactly right. I mean, Homer writing the
Yeah.
Odyssey,
Yeah.
it was.
And so it's like that with companies. We think of everybody kind of is started. You can see the worm turn with Apple.
Yeah.
Apple used to be you can't lose, everything's great, and now because it's so prevalent and it's everywhere, omnipresence builds resentment to some degree.
It certainly does.
And so they want to knock them down a peg. So now Apple's not as good as it used to be. Oh, that last update was this bad. It's like they're still the most unique and most dominating
Absolutely.
company in the world.
Yes, absolutely.
And so those cliches are because they're based in truth. So tell me how, because I think most futurists, that's why like Dan Burris, who's a fantastic futurist,
unbelievable, yeah.
but he talks like 15, 20 years in the future, which is great because by the time we can verify that, he's moved on and cashed a lot of checks. But you had a lot less time frame, so you're looking at these companies.
Well, to me, part of what will ensure business success, regardless of the size of the business, regardless of if it's a one-person shop like you and I, or if it's Apple.
You have more than one person.
Well, but yeah, it's based on.
I've called your office to
talked
get a hold of
Shelley
you.
and
Yeah.
Barry and Tammy.
Well, anytime you have to press something to get Scott McKain, there's another person involved.
That's true. But part of it is, are you so distinctive at what you do that you attract customers to do business with you? By that I mean every business is out there pursuing customers, right? And every business should be doing that. Apple advertises, but the distinctive organizations are so good at what they do that customers are attracted to do business with them. They're not always out there. Starbucks doesn't run a lot of ads. I mean, they run some, but they
Right.
don't run. I mean, they're
They do
not,
sponsorships sometimes just for brand awareness.
Exactly. So they're just trying to keep mind share, but they're not really out there clubbing you over the head to get market share. And so that's to me the essence of distinction. And it happens with, it could be a dry cleaners in your community that you're like, wow, these folks are really friendly. They're really, that you're telling people about them, that they're so good. The old Steve Martin line that I know that you
when
know.
I hear it, I'll tell you if I know it.
Oh, okay. Steve Martin was asked, when people say, how can I be like you? How can I be a comedian? He said, here's the problem. That's the question they're saying, but it's not the question they're asking. And the interviewer said, well, what does that mean? He said, what they're asking is not how do I become a great comedian or how to become, an actor. They're asking, how do I become famous? Yeah. And he said, I realize that's the heart of what they're asking. And he said, the answer is become so good at what you do, you are impossible to ignore.
Well, that's why I want to talk about the distinction you make about distinction.
Yeah.
See how I doubled
I
word
love
that?
that. I see
It's
what
not
you
about
do.
it's not about being distinct, just being different.
Just being different,
Because
right.
I always use Seth Godin's purple cow.
Yeah.
I don't like that expression because he says, a purple cow attracts, being different, being a purple cow will attract business or attract people. But I think as a sideshow freak, yes.
Sure.
So if you want people to come see a purple cow, and anybody who's heard the podcast has heard me use this expression all the time because it does bother me. They'll come see a purple cow.
Yeah.
So that's distinction.
Right.
but they're not going to eat a purple steak and they're not going to drink purple milk until for a while.
And see,
because it's too distinct.
Well, I would say it's differentiated, but it's not distinctive. And there's the point that I'm making is I could slap every customer in the face and hey, I'm different.
Well, that's like that.
And
the ones that cut the ties. What's those places?
Yeah,
the restaurants that do that.
Yeah, it just. I saw a post the other day that said different is better than better. No, it's not.
Yeah.
No, it's not. Different is different. And the only way that you become distinctive is to be different at something that's meaningful to your customer.
It's it's distinctive in quality, not just a distinctive for distinctive sake.
I'll give you an example. You could talk about Jägermeister, right? It's really different. And I know that there's people that's written blog posts and stuff about Jaeger. Well, Jaeger sales are tanking right now. Fireball's the new hottest thing, right?
My wife brought her a little sample thing because she loves it. She'll have a little sip of it to go to sleep at night.
Yeah. And so, well, imagine this. Jaeger is now coming out with a cinnamon-flavored imitation.
But don't they have like a vanilla? Jaeger's always been doing vanilla.
They're always doing,
because it tastes like Robitussin, so they've got to get past that.
It does. Okay, so then shifted over to my favorite liquor, which is bourbon. And Pappy Van Winkle is the hardest to get, but you know what? It also wins the taste tests. Mm-hmm. And so it's a high quality. Okay, so which one would you rather be? The one that's been around forever and still has the top of the market in terms of desire of customers and all that? Or do you want to be the passing fad? And it's exactly what you're saying, is that the purple cow might be the passing fad. People look at it, but the key to business is repeat and referral. I mean, regardless of the size of the company, Apple gets repeat business and referral business. You know, Starbucks gets repeat business and come go with me, I'll meet you at Starbucks. So it's referral business. The local insurance agent that's so great and knows you so well and takes care of you and your family, they get repeat business, they get referral business. You can't make it in business without that. And different won't sustain that.
So how do you find in your business, because a lot of people model themselves after other people. Like, sure. I'm sure there are a lot of speakers, because when I say, hey, I'm going to be talking to Scott McKain, they're like, oh, he's a great speaker.
They need to aim higher.
Yeah, well, I had someone...
You said the same thing,
I had someone tell me how great a speaker I was, and I'm like, you must be new. There's your VIP sticker. Yes, you're new. So, but I mean, they go, I see a Scott McKain or a Randy Gage or another speaker of high quality and start to form their speaking business like that. And so I think other people see businesses and say, well, I'm going to model my business. Because like I always tell people in podcasting, you can steal format, just don't steal content. But since they're not really creating it, they're copying it. How can you figure out what to make distinct? Because you're obviously, and I don't think it's a bad thing to model your business after another successful business, right?
Sure.
But how do you know or to identify what to make and focus on being more distinct besides just being great? Because I think you have to do that no matter what.
That's a great question. I think there's two elements to it. And one is, when I was first getting started in the speaking business, as an example, there was this speaker that I admired so much. I mean, to the point of I tried to sound like him. I wanted to be him.
With your voice? Do you do impersonations?
No. I
was going to say, you're too distinctive.
Thank you.
People
but the reason I am, I think, is because to one of the greatest things that happened to me in my business was he took me out to lunch and we sat down and he said, as long as you're trying to be the next me, the best you can hope for is second place. I got a corner on the me market.
Yeah.
You know? But he said, if you're the best Scott McKain you can be, so, and that leads to the second answer to the question, right? Number one is, it's good to emulate, but not to imitate.
Right.
You know? But the second is, I think we've gotten to the point of best practices to infinity. We think that we read something that Apple does, or Starbucks does, or Southwest Airlines is doing, and we think, oh, well, let's do that for our business. Not even asking the question, maybe that just works for coffee shops.
Yeah, they don't put it, and there's no context.
Exactly. And so I think what you do is try to see more of the philosophy of the idea. For example, in Apple, integrating hardware and software and owning both, right? I mean, how does that apply to the speaking business? Well, I might think, okay, the focus of my business isn't my speaking, it's my intellectual property. And so how do I integrate other aspects, online training, consulting, coaching, other things that could be a part of that, and see that from Apple and think, how can I apply that to my business? But just because one of these distinctive organizations is doing it doesn't mean you take it and extrapolate it to infinity in your own business, because it might not work for your business. And I think that's the key. Is number one, choose to be yourself. And the other thing is, I think we run from our own uniqueness. I think
I don't think we identify our own unique.
That's part of why. Yeah,
I just think people. I don't know if it's modesty. I don't know, because I don't know, because we're surrounded by people who are not modest here.
To say the least.
So when I think about the real world, because I actually have two mindsets. I know I'm coming to NSA, so my brain goes, remember who you're dealing with, so don't get too upset because they're too big or ego-driven. They're not like this when they're probably at other places, and if they are, you don't have to deal with them.
Sure.
And then my clients are not like this, so they're different sets of people.
Right.
But it's like, what the way they act and the way they are works for them in that moment. Where, like, someone asked me the other day, how did you be so funny, and how can I be funny? And I said, well, you go live with my parents for 18 years.
Exactly.
But you're going to have to do that starting from scratch. So get your brain erased and then start from scratch for 18 years, because that's where you develop all your stuff.
You bet.
And then it's a matter of owning it. And I don't think people recognize what they're distinctive at, because they're like being humiliated. They think they're good at one thing.
Right.
I find that a lot. People think they're really good at one thing when their true talent is way over here, and maybe they just haven't embraced it or understood it yet.
You bet.
So how can we do that self-assessment? Because not everybody's good at self-assessment.
Oh, it's funny that you say that. I was just reading a thing about different challenges, and it was talking about a particular individual in the political field and being narcissistic, and they said the problem.
I have no idea who he could possibly
be talking about. And part of it, I love this line. It said the problem is narcissism is not self-reporting. Isn't that a great line? If you're depressed, you go say, "Hey, I need some help. I'm depressed." If you're narcissistic, you can't imagine that anything's wrong with you, right? And so you never. So it's not.
And even others of people's opinions, if they don't match yours,
right.
They kind of like go through the filter. They
exactly.
Just no.
They've got to be wrong, because I've got to, and it's. One of the great pieces of advice I got here was to write an autobiography. And that sounds egocentric, but what you're really trying to do is to mine your own experience instead of someone else's. And it was really an interesting process, because the things that really connect you with your audience, or the things that connect you with customers or other people, are those things we have in common. And so, something that happened growing up in my parents' grocery store that to me was not even on my radar screen as a possible story, now is one of the stories I use to open every speech, because it's so normal.
Yeah, everybody's
connected. Yeah, and I think sometimes we think unless we've climbed Mount Everest naked backwards, at night,
well, that's
we don't have a story to tell. But I think customers, regardless of the business, but particularly in the speaking business, but customers identify more with what we have in common than these extraordinary things of difference that you've done.
Yeah, so it's really trying to find ththings that you can relate with other people as easy as possible,
yes,
and quickly as possible.
Yes.
Because otherwise you're wasting a lot of time and resources.
Absolutely.
So like I said, is there a way that we can, because again, it's one of those things where I don't think my story about going camping at one time is important. How can you write that autobiography, how can you get through that? Is it better to have someone like interview you and to pull those things out? Because
for me, it was just sitting down, and I mean, the autobiography will never see the light of day.
Oh,
no,
it's an exercise.
It's an exercise.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's the discipline too of what happened to me at this particular time. Oh, I remember when. And we have so much in common, regardless of, I grew up in rural Indiana, and at the time, my mom's favorite television show the main character was an African-American gynecologist who lived in New York City. It was the Cosby Show. But the funny thing about it was, we didn't have any minorities at all in our community.
I grew up in New Hampshire the same way.
Yeah, but yet so what did she identify with? Well, she identified with the stories about family. Now, certainly, there's some revisionist history going on because of, but sometimes I think we have to focus on the message and not the messenger.
Sometimes, but also some messengers who rely too heavily on identifying with the message
to get them.
Because you have to realize, I mean, you're right. If it was anybody else, we would still be, because there's Roman Polanski, there's other people. We would probably go, oh, that's hot. They can separate the person from the act. But in this particular case, Bill Cosby had such a moral message, and he was continuing on that, pulling your pants up and knocking out all this stuff. He was taking the moral high ground to find out about that.
Yeah.
That one in particular does it makes a difference.
To me, he's a secular Jimmy Swaggart. Right? I mean, he is. He used the message as a pass, almost. But at the end of the day, the moral of the story that he was teaching on the Cosby Show still has great validity, even though the messenger was flawed.
I constantly tell people, it's part of my program, don't disregard the message because you don't like the messenger.
Yeah, right.
Because if someone's complaining, doesn't mean they're wrong.
Yeah.
It just means that they're probably saying it in a way you don't like.
Yeah.
And if you can look past that and actually listen to the information, you can save yourself a lot of time and problems and money.
Sure.
In business.
Yeah.
But I think in this post Vincent Peale life of corporate, me and you go way back with the motivation information debate. It's one of those things where the unicorn forts and rainbows have kind of overtaken to the point where anybody who disagrees is now labeled negative and is ignored. And so even being that distinctive person can often be ignored because you're not part of the crowd. So how can a small business, because we talk about these great big businesses, and sometimes it's hard to scale down. Scaling up is actually is easier than scaling down sometimes.
That's a great point too, because you tend to use those big businesses because it's universal.
And everybody knows it.
If I talk about Apple, everybody listening has had some kind of experience or knows someone who has. If I talk about the restaurant or the distinctive dry cleaners.
But do you have an example of a small like in Henderson?
Yeah.
In Henderson, Nevada, there's a lot of little restaurants. That's a great place to live, except for the heat and the lack of water.
Yeah.
But other than those two things, which you need to survive, but other than those two things, there's a lot of what kind of distinctive small things are you seeing versus the big, huge Apple?
Oh, Gaetano's restaurant on Eastern in
not a sponsor.
Yeah, right, not a sponsor.
But we'd be happy to take him on.
Gaetano himself runs the restaurant. He is classic old world Italian, with a heavy accent, and he welcomes you. And his wife is often working in the restaurant, and the sons are often working in the restaurant, and it is just an extraordinary experience. And it's great food. It takes them 15 minutes to tell you the evening specials that are being prepared specially that night, that kind of thing. And it's kind of become a go-to place for my wife and me. And
it's not just the food; it's the experience.
It's a total experience.
He comes over and says hello to you, and it's not just you. He's not doing it because you're Scott McKain,
no,
which he
has
easily
no
would.
Idea who I am. No,
but you are a paying customer.
Yeah.
And his distinction is going out of his way to make that a family experience.
Absolutely. But yet there's another restaurant that we go to a lot because we like the food, and it's one of the casinos.
Mm-hmm.
And I've yet to have a manager come over and say hello. Now, the folks working the bar know us because we set the bar and we get dinner, and they're fabulous. They create a great experience. But I have yet to have a manager come over and say hello.
Yeah,
and it's like, and so that they're more transient.
Well, also the casino's goal to be distinctive isn't the food.
Yeah, it's to get you back out on the floor.
It's to get you, but it's also they want you to win more. They want you to play more.
Yeah.
The food is there for the people who need to eat before they pass out, so they can go back. It's like those like you hear those stories in those Korean internet cafes where someone dies of dehydration playing video games
because they've been there so long.
So they do that at the casino. Yeah. So I don't agree with it. They should say something, but that's why
changing in a way, because this is I think this year, or not this year, but the previous 12 months. Was the first time that restaurant revenue exceeded gaming revenue, because millennials don't want to come gamble, but they do want to come party.
Right.
And so they will eat expensive meals and go to super expensive clubs to see the name DJs, and all that. So it's really interesting to see this change that's happening. And so there's part of the whole deal in Vegas right now. How do we create a more distinctive club that will attract people? There's a smaller business. There's still a decent size, but they're in the Pacific Northwest that our mutual friend Joe Calloway introduced me to.
Oh, Joe's great.
Called Les Schwab Tires. And at Les Schwab, you pull in, and I mean, before you get your car in park, a uniformed employee sprints out of the door and runs up to the car and welcomes you to Les Schwab.
It's 1952.
Exactly. Like in Back to the Future.
Yeah,
remember
the
when
old
he
gas
sees
station,
the old gas station? And it's recreated that to a degree. And in the markets that they serve, now tires are a commodity, right? I mean, it's the same. They have the highest market share, and they also have the highest margins. What a concept. Let's sell more of the same stuff at a higher price than our competitor does. But that's part of what we're purchasing is that total experience. One of the other things that they do is if you've got a flat tire, they'll fix it, regardless of where you bought the tire.
Right.
Regardless of whether or not guess what happens? The wife is having tire trouble. She gets it fixed. She goes home and tells her husband how the great folks at Les Schwab, fixed their tire, wouldn't even charge them, wouldn't take a nickel. Well, so guess what? If you've had a flat, you're probably at some point in the near future going to need a new tire. Where do they go?
Yeah.
It's not. That's what I think. We make this so much harder than it needs to be.
It is because people see how someone goes from point A to point C, but they have no idea where point B is.
Yeah.
So they have to manufacture point B with no education, or it's ignorance, not stupidity, but ignorance. They have no idea how they got from A to C, and so they have to figure out and develop B. And because they have such esteem or respect for how they got to point C, they think point B has to be complicated.
Yeah.
They have to, because Scott McKain does these great speeches. He's fantastic on the platform. He must have done all this other stuff and complicated things to get to where he is, when in fact you've just been good over time.
You work hard at it, But it's interesting to me how many businesses of whatever size don't do what I call transpositional thinking, which is just a fancy way of saying I want to transpose my thinking to being a customer. We go to work and we think like the business person, the manager, the salesperson. We don't think like the customer thinks, because if we did, a lot of the crap that's going on right now in business wouldn't be happening. I called. I'll
go for
say
it.
The company, because they're not a sponsor.
They're not a sponsor. They could be if they wanted to be.
I call AT&T.
Okay.
And they said because of higher than expected call volume, your wait time will be 20 minutes. Are you kidding me? 20 minutes to hold? That's ridiculous. The person who needs to be fired in America is the person that's anticipating call volume, because every place I'm calling now is saying, due to higher than anticipated call volume. That's just a way of saying we don't want to spend the money to hire enough operators to take care of our customers,
or
so
we're not putting out a good enough product
exactly
that you have to call it all.
You have to call it all, right? And so it's asinine to me that we don't think, well, if I was the customer, what would I want here?
So putting yourself in the part of the customer. So that's the key thing. It's like with podcasts, I get upset because there's so many podcasters that don't listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
So they only listen to themselves. I rarely listen to this. I was there. I don't need to listen to it.
Yeah.
But you don't understand what the listener wants or needs because you're not a listener.
Exactly. I mean, how do you become an author if you don't read?
Yeah, if you don't write a book, how can you?
I've had a couple of people say that. I said, well, what's your favorite books? Well, I don't really read books. I'm writing one as a business card.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
You kidding me? Then it's going to be a pretty crappy business card. It's
because that's how I designed my keynotes. Because I was in the corporate world, I got stuck having to go to these motivational rah-rah. Did nothing for me in the moment, or even long term. It would just seem to be something to do.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do that when I got into this business, which is why I kind of gravitated towards where I did. It's about, hey, I remember what it's like. I mean, I had a great conversation with Terry Brock and Gina Carr and my wife just the other night. Now, my wife works for an oil and gas company. She's forced to take these awful webinars.
Yeah.
I love her anyways, but she's also my soundboard because she's the consumer.
Yeah.
So when people talk about what's wrong with webinars, some webinar people are thinking, well, what don't I like about it? Or they'll just put out a blast and they'll get random emails from some people, and usually it's the people who have crazy complaints.
Yeah.
It's not the person who's not going to say anything. Like my wife's not going to complain.
Yeah.
She'll come home and say, oh, I got stuck, I almost fell asleep at this horrible thing.
Yeah.
But that's the person you need to get the information from.
Absolutely.
So how can we find those people? How can we find not only do we find the audience, but sometimes it's hard to get them to answer because a lot of people don't want to say bad things.
Well, I think you ask them direct questions. It fascinates me. I mean, I was doing a project with a school bus company many years ago, and I asked the CEO, because the CEO was talking about all the complaints they're getting of dust coming in when they were picking up kids in rural areas. And he said, I just can't believe that's true. And I said, well, have you ridden on a school bus in a dusty road? And he looked at me like I'd,
why would I do
insulted.
that?
Why would I?
I mean, selling myself for the poor folks?
I said, if that's a complaint about your product, you need to experience this firsthand. Well, he did, and he got dust all over him, and then talk about something that'll force changes down the road. You're exactly right. I think we need to consume our own product. There's nobody from AT&T, no executive at the C-suite in AT&T is calling the ordinary customer line and being put on hold for 20 minutes and doing that. And as silly as it sounds, we need to be a customer of our own product. We need to be a customer of the competitor's product. But I think the people in charge need to, give me a random list of 10 people that were on the webinar. I'm going to call them and I'm going to say, and ask some open-ended but very specific questions. What was the best thing about this? What was the worst thing about this? What could we do to improve? How can we make this more interesting to you? Most of us don't do that. The vast majority of us don't do it because we're really kind of afraid to hear the answer.
And also, when most people most customers are going to be apathetic.
Yeah.
Means they're not going to say a word and they're just not going to come back.
Yep.
You'll hear the most extreme of each side, or the fanatics who love you, which it's like testing.
Yeah, right,
you got
right.
the top 2% and the bottom 2%. Get rid of them, and what's the aggregate? So I think with the internet, especially anonymous comments, you're going to get just the worst, and a lot of that time is over exaggerated and because they want to be heard or they're trying to make a point. Oftentimes it's usually meaner, 10 times more than it actually is, or it's a very specific incident that only happened once and may not ever recur.
Right.
Or you're going to get someone who just loves you no matter, like with Apple, you've got people who are fanatics and it doesn't matter.
Total fanboys,
yeah. Because I keep telling them, the more popular they get, the more problems there's going to be.
Of course.
Because, I've never had a virus on my Mac. You know why? PC had 80% market share and everybody's trying to figure out how to destroy those things.
Yeah, right.
Once Mac gets big enough,
exactly right.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So the last, because I got your time, and we're here at convention. You've got a lot of things going on. I've got a lot of things going on.
This is a blast, though. It's great talking.
What is the one thing that we can make ourselves more distinctive that we haven't talked about yet that isn't obvious, that most people wouldn't think about, that can really make them extremely distinctive and
in the book, I talk about the 4 cornerstones of distinction, the 4 things you've got to do. None of them will be like horrifically, shocking to anybody. But the one that really surprised me as I was doing the research is the first cornerstone is clarity. You have to be absolutely clear about where your flag is in the ground. You have to be willing to say no to some customers that we don't do this. You have to be absolutely precise about what the one thing is that you want to be known for. Creativity is second. But yet, how many of these bad programs have we been to where they tell us to think outside the box and get creative and all that?
Be awesome.
Yeah.
And it's like,
what
that
does
means
mean?
nothing.
That means nothing.
And,
You're exactly right.
Alan Stevens hates the word awesome.
Well, I interviewed some songwriters in Nashville. And I
How are the Oak Ridge Boys?
They're doing great. Thank you.
I know they're
busier than they've ever been.
I know they're your friends.
Incredible. They're great. Yeah. And I met them when I was 15. That's the fun thing.
So the songwriters.
Yeah, songwriters. I thought I was wanting to know more about creativity. So what if your life depended on you being creative on demand, right? Because if I'm a songwriter, the only way I keep making money is to be creative and write more songs. I mean, that's
have a string of horrible relationships.
Yeah. And it really surprised me because one in particular expressed it so well. She said, I have a lot of decisions to make before I write a song. Is this going to be a ballad or up tempo? Is this going to be pop, rock, or country? Do I want it sung by a male, a female, or a group? I have to make those decisions first. So once I'm clear about I'm writing a country ballad that I want a female vocalist to sing, then I start getting creative. The clarity has to come before creativity. So you decide where you're going to put your flag in the ground, and this is what we stand for. This is what we won't stand for. This is who I am. And, I got to tell you, part of where this came from is that I needed it for my own business. I mean, I haven't talked about that a lot before, but my business was going through, I'd had a family tragedy. My wife passed away. Because of that, I'd kind of been out of the loop for a while. And this is a tough business. If you're, out of sight, out of mind, my business was not doing. And I was looking for what it would take to get my business back on its feet. How could I stand out in the marketplace? And it really started out of me trying to find out how I could save this career that I'd spent years building and turn it around. And
Because it can go quick
it
in
can
this.
go very
you can be
quickly.
a $1 million speaker to never getting a phone call.
Exactly, and it's terrifying. And what I discovered was, I called speakers bureaus and I said, when you recommend me, what do you say? Really good speaker, really nice guy. Okay, so the guy at Ford is calling the speakers bureau saying, you know what we need this year in front of our dealers? A really nice guy.
Sounds like they're talking about an ex-boyfriend.
Oh, doesn't it? I mean, it just sounds so generic.
Yeah.
And so I thought, as I was studying what would make you stand out in the marketplace, I realized this was something a lot of businesses needed, but I first of all needed it for myself. And it's I've been very. Tammy, my wife, has a great line. She says, "Don't say you're lucky. That's random. Say we're fortunate." And she's exactly right. And so, been very fortunate. It's been the best thing ever in my career because every business needs to know what does it take to stand out and move up in a challenging marketplace, and what does it take to create distinction. And so that's what I learned and applied to my own business, and hopefully can help other people and organizations do it as well.
Well, I've been very fortunate to have you as my friend, not just someone I know.
Well,
and it's been several years now, and
Yeah.
I really appreciate your friendship. And
Same here,
and
Greg.
you answer my phone calls,
Oh, of
and
course.
and come on the podcast, and then
Happy
just
to.
just saying hello and talking and commenting online and being snarky and all kinds of stuff. I really appreciate it. And
Oh, thanks.
so obviously scottmckain.com.
Yes.
The book again?
That's McKain, by the way.
I'll get links. I'm going to put affiliate links of Amazon everywhere. I'm going to make some money off of you, Scott.
It's so funny, because when John McKain ran for president, everybody started spelling my name the same way. And so I always make the point to say that. But yeah, scottmckain.com. The book is Create Distinction, What to Do When Great Isn't Good Enough to Grow Your Business.
Well, nobody's more distinct than you,
I
Scott.
appreciate it, man. Thank you. Great being with you again.
That's the show. Thanks to Scott for his time. Always good just to listen to him talk. Like the Facebook page, follow at Reality Check Pod on Twitter, sign up for the newsletter at realitycheckpodcast.com, and I am always looking for interesting and unique guests, so email Craig at speakercraigprice.com with comments, questions, and all important guest suggestions. We'll see you next week.